The janitor walked quietly through the empty hallways of the tall office building. It was late, long after most employees had left, and the hum of the lights was the only sound breaking the silence. He pushed a mop along the shiny floor, careful not to make a loud noise that would disturb the night. His movements were slow and precise, almost like a ritual he had performed many times before. He was not a man people noticed. In fact, most people hardly ever saw him. To them, he was invisible, just a background figure who cleaned up after everyone else. He wore a simple uniform that had faded from years of washing, and his shoes were scuffed, telling stories of countless nights spent walking the same halls. His hands, however, told a different story. They were strong but nimble, with long fingers that moved with a grace that did not match the rest of his rough appearance. These hands had once held something far more delicate than a mop, something that demanded both precision and soul. But now, they carried only the weight of cleaning supplies and a life of quiet work, every night.
Wow.
As he finished his routine cleaning, he found himself drawn to the old piano in the lobby. It was a grand piano, polished but slightly worn, standing like a forgotten jewel in the center of the building. No one had played it for months, maybe years. The janitor would pause, push his cleaning cart aside, and gently run his fingers over the keys. He never played a full piece, just small notes, small fragments, almost as if testing the piano to see if it still remembered him. He had a habit of closing his eyes when he touched the keys, letting memories flood back in. Memories he did not share with anyone. He had not always been a janitor. There was a time when music had filled his days, when people had listened to him and been moved by the sound of his piano. He had trained for years, practicing late into the night, pouring his soul into each note. He had dreamed of stages, of applause, of being recognized for his talent. But life had other plans. Tragedy had struck, and slowly, the doors that led to that life closed one by one. The piano had been left behind, and with it, his place in the world he had imagined. Now, he moved silently through the halls, a shadow of what he had once been, carrying the memory of music in his heart. The building itself was a world of contrast. During the day, it was full of energy, of people rushing to meetings, speaking loudly on phones, typing furiously at keyboards. But at night, it became a different place. The lights softened, the noise faded, and the building seemed almost human, breathing slowly in the quiet. The janitor felt this change deeply. He moved with the rhythm of the building, understanding its moods, knowing which areas needed attention and which could wait until morning. There was a rhythm to his work, a kind of poetry in the repetition of his tasks. Some nights, when he touched the piano, he imagined the sound filling the empty hallways, imagined it reaching the offices above, drifting through the floors like a message from another life. He did not play for anyone, and yet in those moments, it felt as though the building itself was listening. The cold marble seemed to soften, the shadows seemed to lift, and he felt a small flicker of the joy he had once known. Music was still alive in him, though hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. The employees of the building were largely unaware of him. They passed by in the mornings and evenings, polite but distant. Some frowned when he was in their way, others ignored him completely. He had grown used to this. He did not need recognition or applause now. He did his work quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. But even so, the piano was a reminder of a different kind of recognition, a kind that mattered more than any praise from the outside world. It reminded him that he still had something no one could take away. One evening, as he pushed his cart down the hall, he overheard a group of employees laughing near the elevator. They were talking about a big event that was coming up in the building, a gala where wealthy guests would gather to show off their success. The janitor did not usually listen to office gossip, but a part of him was curious. He wondered if there would be music at the event, if someone would play the piano he cared for so deeply. He felt a pang of longing, but quickly turned his attention back to his work, moving silently along the walls, unseen and unnoticed. After finishing the last corridor, he returned to the lobby. The grand piano sat in the center, its black surface gleaming under the soft lights. He approached it, his hands hovering over the keys for a moment. He pressed down gently, and a soft note echoed through the empty space. He closed his eyes, letting the sound fill him, letting it remind him of everything he had loved and lost. Time seemed to stretch, and for a moment, he was not a janitor at all. He was the young man who had dreamed of stages and applause, who had lived in music and found his soul reflected in every note. The lobby was still, the silence embracing him. He knew that tomorrow the world would return, with its noise and its routines, and he would return to his quiet life, moving unnoticed through the hallways. But tonight, for a few precious moments, he allowed himself to dream. He imagined a world where his music mattered again, where people listened and felt something they could not explain. He imagined eyes turning toward him, not with disdain or indifference, but with wonder. As the night deepened, he finally pulled his hands away from the piano. He straightened, gave the keys a final gentle touch, and whispered to himself a promise he had carried for years. He would not forget. Music was not gone from his life. It was merely waiting, hidden like a seed beneath the soil, ready to grow when the time was right. He pushed his cart back along the hallways, the sound of wheels on marble blending with the memory of the piano's song. He walked into the night quietly, as always, carrying with him the hope of a future that had yet to come. A future where the world might finally hear the music he had kept alive all these years. The next morning, the office building was alive with energy. Employees hurried through the halls, phones pressed to ears, laptops balanced in arms, and coffee cups held tightly as if fuel could carry them faster through the day. The janitor moved along quietly, invisible as always. He carried his mop and bucket, weaving around busy workers without attracting a single glance. Most people never noticed him, and he had long stopped expecting them to. High above the floors, in a large, sunlit office, the billionaire worked. He was a man of influence, confident in his decisions and proud of his accomplishments. Every day, he watched the world bend to his plans, and he enjoyed the sense of control that wealth and power provided. His office overlooked the city, and the windows reflected the image of a man who had everything, or so it seemed. He had everything he thought he wanted: money, success, and respect, but there was a side of him that craved something more, a feeling he could not name, a satisfaction beyond business deals and financial gain. The billionaire had heard about the upcoming gala weeks ago. It was an event to impress the city's elite, a gathering where wealthy families and influential people would mingle. Music was always part of such events, and he had arranged for a famous pianist to play that evening. He expected perfection, a flawless performance that would leave guests in awe. To him, music was a backdrop to success, a way to show taste and refinement, not something that carried deeper meaning. It was important, but only as part of the image he wanted to project. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his quiet routine, moving from floor to floor. He swept, mopped, and polished, always careful not to interrupt the rhythm of the building's daily life. Though he was surrounded by people, he felt removed from their world, a silent observer in a place that never slowed down for him. His thoughts often drifted to the piano, to the music he had once created, to the life that seemed like a distant dream. He knew the gala would take place in the lobby where the piano stood, but he did not dare hope that anyone would pay attention to him. His role was simple: keep the building clean and stay out of the way. As the day wore on, employees discussed the gala in hushed tones. Some complained about the extra work required to prepare. Others expressed excitement at the prospect of seeing important guests. The janitor overheard snippets of conversation while emptying trash cans or wiping counters. He learned that the pianist scheduled to play was someone highly acclaimed, expected to impress the attendees with skill and grace. People speculated about the repertoire, the dress code, and the finest table arrangements. For the janitor, it was all distant noise. But the mention of the piano made his heart tighten with a mix of longing and apprehension. Later, while adjusting a chair in the lobby, the janitor noticed the grand piano. It gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the windows, polished for the evening's event. He approached it cautiously, almost instinctively, and ran his fingers over the keys. The sound was muted, gentle, yet it carried a strange comfort. He could feel the anticipation of the night ahead, though he did not yet understand that it might change everything. He had no idea that the billionaire himself would soon notice him, not for the work he did, but for something far more unexpected. The billionaire, always alert to the activity in his building, walked through the lobby to inspect preparations for the gala. He observed the staff arranging tables, adjusting decorations, and coordinating lighting. His sharp eyes caught every detail, ensuring nothing fell short of his high standards. As he turned a corner, he noticed the janitor near the piano, standing silently with his hands resting lightly on the keys. There was a pause in the billionaire's stride. He had seen the janitor countless times before, a shadow in the background, but never had he looked closely. Curiosity stirred. He stopped, observing the man without speaking. The janitor, sensing movement behind him, turned slightly, but did not remove his hands from the piano. There was a quiet dignity in the way he stood, a calmness that contrasted with the chaos around him. The billionaire, accustomed to commanding attention, found himself momentarily disarmed by this quiet presence. He studied the janitor's hands, long and slender, and the subtle tension in his posture. Something about the way the man touched the keys suggested more than casual familiarity. It hinted at knowledge, at experience, at a story hidden beneath layers of ordinary life. For a brief moment, the lobby seemed to shrink around them. The sound of footsteps, chatter, and preparations faded into the background. The billionaire felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with unease. He had always been in control, always known what to expect. Yet here was a man he had overlooked, a man who carried himself differently, who seemed to possess a quiet confidence that did not rely on wealth or status. He did not understand why he felt compelled to watch, why this simple janitor drew his attention more than any decoration or arrangement. The janitor sensed the gaze but did not react. He was accustomed to being observed and ignored in equal measure. His life had taught him patience, resilience, and discretion. He had learned to move through the world without demanding recognition, to carry the weight of his past in silence. Music was the only companion he allowed himself, the one thing he did not hide. Yet today, for reasons he could not explain, he felt the presence of someone who might see beyond the surface, someone who might notice the story hidden in his hands. Throughout the day, the building's energy shifted as the gala approached. Staff hurried to complete final preparations. Tables were draped with white cloths, silverware polished to a shine, and flowers arranged with careful precision. The janitor moved silently among them, doing his work without comment. Yet in his mind, the evening held a quiet tension. He did not yet know what role he might play, if any. He only knew that the piano awaited, that something about the approaching event felt different from any night before. As evening approached, the billionaire returned to his office, reviewing guest lists and schedules. He was meticulous, ensuring that every detail reflected his standards. He did not expect surprises, nor did he anticipate disruptions. The idea that someone from the shadows, a janitor unnoticed for years, might become a part of this carefully orchestrated event was inconceivable. Yet, as he glanced again toward the lobby, a sense of unease lingered. There was something about the man by the piano, a quiet presence that defied expectation, that hinted at the possibility of the unexpected. The janitor, meanwhile, finished his final rounds. The building was nearly ready for the gala. Lights were dimmed to create an elegant atmosphere, and the lobby was transformed into a space of anticipation and grandeur. He paused once more at the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. He felt the history of the instrument, the echoes of past performances, and a surge of emotion he had long suppressed. He did not know that the night would challenge the boundaries between his hidden talent and the world above, between anonymity and recognition. As the first guests arrived, the janitor retreated quietly, continuing his duties, while observing the unfolding scene. He watched the wealthy and powerful mingle, their laughter, their conversations, their polished appearances forming a stark contrast to his quiet, understated presence. Yet in the midst of this controlled spectacle, he carried a secret he had not shared with a soul. He knew music could change everything, could speak in ways words could not. He held on to that knowledge, a fragile thread connecting the man he was now to the life he had once known. And so the stage was set. The building was filled with anticipation, elegance, and expectation. The billionaire watched, confident in the order he had created, unaware that the quiet janitor, unnoticed by most, would soon challenge every assumption. The contrast between their worlds, the difference between power and hidden talent, had never been more apparent. And in that tension, the story waited, poised to unfold in ways neither could have imagined. The evening of the gala arrived. The building shimmered with light and life. Guests arrived in elegant dresses and sharp suits, their laughter and conversation filling the air with excitement. The lobby had been transformed into a place of luxury. Soft lighting reflecting off polished floors and tables decorated with fine linens and sparkling glassware. The air smelled of flowers, champagne, and freshly polished wood, a blend that spoke of wealth and careful preparation. Amid all this, the janitor moved silently, unseen, performing his duties while keeping one eye on the piano, which sat at the center of the lobby, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. The scheduled pianist had been confirmed days earlier, a performer known for technical skill and flair, but as the minutes passed, a message came from backstage. The pianist would not arrive. A sudden emergency had pulled them away, leaving the organizers scrambling to find a replacement. Panic spread among the staff. They whispered, tried to call other musicians, and considered options, but nothing seemed possible at the last minute. The lobby hummed with nervous energy as guests chatted. Unaware of the looming problem, the billionaire noticed the commotion. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd, observing the flustered staff. He did not expect such chaos. He had planned every detail meticulously. He demanded calm and solutions, but the reality of the moment challenged him. The gala was meant to be flawless, a display of perfection, and now an essential element: music was missing. He walked among the staff, inspecting faces, questioning what had gone wrong. The pressure to maintain control, to salvage the evening, pressed on him heavily. While the staff debated, the janitor continued his quiet work, emptying trash bins and arranging chairs, listening to the flurry of panic. He felt a familiar pull toward the piano, an instinct that could not be ignored. Without making a sound, he stepped closer, brushing his hands over the polished keys. He could hear the whispers of staff and guests alike, some doubting whether a replacement could be found. The janitor, calm and steady, understood something they did not. Music needed no announcement, no stage, no approval. It simply required courage and presence. One of the event organizers, noticing the janitor near the piano, approached him hurriedly. "Can you play?" they asked, the desperation in their voice barely disguised. The janitor looked at them, considering. He had not performed publicly for years, yet he knew the piano, knew what it demanded, and felt the weight of the moment. He did not speak, only nodded slightly, a gesture that startled the organizer. Laughter and disbelief followed nearby guests, and staff whispered among themselves, some amused at the thought of a janitor playing at such a high-profile event. Yet the janitor did not flinch. His hands hovered over the keys, ready to bridge the gap between his hidden talent and the unexpected opportunity before him. The billionaire, having observed the exchange from a distance, stepped forward. His presence was commanding, and he called the organizer to him. "Who is this man?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The organizer hesitated, explaining that the janitor had offered to play, that they had no other options. The billionaire studied the janitor, a man who had always moved in the background, quiet, unobtrusive, and seemingly ordinary. He could not understand why anyone would suggest such a thing. The notion seemed absurd, almost comical, but the urgency of the situation left him no choice. He gave a curt nod, allowing the janitor to proceed. Though he remained skeptical, guests continued to arrive, their chatter filling the space with a sense of anticipation. The janitor approached the piano fully, adjusting the bench and sitting down with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the bustling activity around him. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settle over him. This was not a rehearsal, not a test, but a moment where every skill, every memory, every fragment of his past could make a difference. He let his hands hover over the keys, letting the air itself settle into silence. The room seemed to pause, the crowd sensing the unusual stillness, waiting to see what would happen. Then, slowly, he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, yet deliberate. They echoed through the lobby, floating over the polished floors and mingling with the murmurs of the guests. The music was unexpected, not flashy, but filled with depth and emotion. It carried a story within it, a quiet power that transcended the ordinary. The janitor's hands moved with precision, grace, and a familiarity that only comes from years of disciplined practice and deep love for the instrument. Every note was purposeful, every chord resonated with honesty. At first, the guests were startled. Some whispered to each other, trying to understand what they were hearing. Laughter and disbelief faded into silence as the music continued. The sound seemed to fill the entire building, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Staff stopped their frantic preparations. Guests paused mid-conversation. And even the billionaire froze, his sharp gaze fixed on the janitor at the piano. He could not move, could not look away. Something in the music reached him, bypassing the exterior of wealth and control. Touching a place within that he had long ignored, the janitor played without hesitation. Drawing from memory, from feeling, from a lifetime of music that had been both nurtured and hidden. The melody rose and fell, weaving a story of loss, resilience, and hope. Guests were captivated, some holding their hands over their hearts, others closing their eyes to better feel the sound. The lobby was no longer a space of social posturing or wealth. It had become a theater of emotion, where music spoke louder than words and presence, mattered more than status. The billionaire's disbelief slowly gave way to awe. He had never seen anything like this. The man he had ignored for years, the janitor who moved silently through his building, was producing music that no hired professional could have matched. Each note revealed skill, emotion, and an understanding of music that transcended mere technique. The performance was not about impressing the elite. It was about truth, honesty, and the power of a human soul expressing itself freely. The billionaire felt something stir within him, a recognition of talent and humanity that he had rarely encountered. Minutes passed, and the music continued to weave through the room. The guests, once skeptical, were now fully engaged, caught in the unexpected magic of the moment. Conversations had ceased. Phones were put down. Staff members glanced at each other in astonishment, unable to believe that such beauty had emerged from the janitor they had long overlooked. The atmosphere shifted completely. What was meant to be an ordinary gala now felt like a profound experience, a reminder that greatness can appear where it is least expected. The janitor did not play for applause or recognition. His eyes remained focused on the keys, his mind immersed in the music. Yet as he played, he felt the building itself responding, the silent acknowledgement of a talent long hidden. The sound of the piano carried across floors, echoing in empty offices, touching corners that had never known such beauty. It was as if the building had waited for this moment, for this music, for the invisible man to reclaim a piece of himself in the most public of spaces. When the final note faded, the lobby remained in stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, the guests began to applaud, their claps hesitant at first, then growing louder as the realization sank in. The music had changed them, had made them feel something they could not articulate. The janitor sat quietly, his hands resting gently on the keys, a small, private smile crossing his face. He had played, and in doing so, he had bridged the gap between the world he had left behind and the one he lived in now. The billionaire stepped closer, his expression a mix of amazement and disbelief. He studied the janitor, seeing not the man who cleaned his building, but the artist who had just silenced a room of elites with nothing but his talent. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was this man? What had he done before? How could someone so ordinary-looking produce something so extraordinary? The gala had been saved not by hired performers, not by carefully planned arrangements, but by the quiet janitor who had dared to play. The unexpected had happened, and no one would ever forget it. The silence that followed the janitor's performance was deep and complete. Guests sat frozen in their seats, some leaning on tables, some standing motionless, as if the music had pulled the air from the room. Even the sound of shifting chairs or quiet coughs seemed distant, muted by the weight of what had just happened. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that a janitor, overlooked and invisible for years, could create something so moving and powerful. The applause that eventually erupted was thunderous, but it could not fully capture the quiet awe that had settled in every heart. The billionaire remained near the piano, staring at the janitor as if trying to decode a mystery. His mind raced with questions he could not immediately answer. How could someone so ordinary-looking, someone he had passed every day without a thought, play with such skill, such feeling, such control? The notes he had just heard were not mechanical or rehearsed. They were alive, full of life and story. Each chord, each subtle pause, spoke of experience, of struggle, of loss, and resilience. The billionaire felt a strange sensation, one that had nothing to do with wealth or power. It was humility, wonder, and a sudden awareness that the world still held surprises he could not command. Guests turned their attention to the janitor, some moving closer, some craning their necks to get a better look. Whispers spread across the room. "Did you see him play? I've never heard anything like that. He's amazing." The words flowed, yet none could explain the depth of what they had just witnessed. The janitor, still seated, simply lowered his hands from the keys. He was calm, serene, and entirely himself. There was no flourish, no demand for recognition. Only the quiet dignity of someone who had shared a piece of his soul. The billionaire approached cautiously, unsure of how to address the man who had so completely disrupted his expectations. "Who are you?" he asked finally, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. The janitor looked up, meeting the billionaire's gaze with a quiet confidence that came from years of knowing his worth, even when no one else did. "I've played before," he said simply, "long ago. But it has been a while." The billionaire raised an eyebrow, still trying to reconcile the image before him with the reality of the music he had just heard. He could not imagine a life where this man had once been a professional pianist. And yet every note he had played proved it true. Something in the janitor's eyes told him he was speaking honestly. There was no exaggeration, no boast. Only truth carried in quiet confidence. Other guests began to gather around, some asking questions, others simply watching in fascination. Stories of the janitor's past began to emerge as he spoke cautiously. He had studied piano for many years, trained under skilled teachers, and performed in small venues before life took a turn he could not prevent. Tragedy had interrupted his path, leaving him with work to survive and a love for music that could not find an outlet. For years he had lived quietly, hiding his talent from the world, yet never letting it die. The billionaire listened, absorbing every word. He felt a mix of emotions he could not easily name: admiration, regret for overlooking this man for so long, a deep respect for the resilience it took to remain passionate about something without recognition. The gala, meant to impress the wealthy elite, had become an unexpected revelation. Power and status had been overshadowed by skill, emotion, and humanity. The billionaire realized that his carefully curated world of control and image had missed something essential, something that could not be purchased or planned. As the janitor continued to share small fragments of his story, a hush fell over the crowd. Guests had stopped their conversations, leaning in to listen. They were captivated not just by the music, but by the journey it represented. The man before them had lived a life of dedication and loss, yet he had not given up. He had held on to his passion, quietly nurturing it, waiting for a moment to express it fully. And tonight, without warning, that moment had arrived. The janitor's humility and honesty resonated with everyone present. It was rare to see such talent coupled with such quiet strength, especially in someone who had not been born into opportunity or privilege. Guests found themselves inspired, reflecting on their own lives, on the risks they had avoided, on dreams they had postponed. The music had not only filled the lobby, it had touched hearts, reminded people of the power of persistence, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. The billionaire felt a shift within himself. He had been proud of his wealth, his control, his influence, yet none of it had prepared him for this. He stepped closer to the janitor, extending a hand not in command but in respect. "I underestimated you," he admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "I can see now that talent and dedication are not always obvious. You have shown me something I did not expect." The janitor accepted the handshake with a quiet nod. There was no pride, no demand for recognition, only acknowledgement of shared understanding. It was a moment that transcended status, connection between two people that had been forged in the music and honesty of the experience. The billionaire felt humbled, realizing that respect must be earned, not assumed, and that greatness can be hidden in the most unlikely places. Guests began to approach, expressing admiration and curiosity. They asked questions about the janitor's training, his past performances, and his experiences. He answered simply, never boasting, never exaggerating, but each word carried weight. It was clear that he had lived a life of discipline, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. The room was transformed, filled with a sense of appreciation that went beyond mere applause. People felt moved, inspired, and reminded of the human potential that exists quietly, waiting to be recognized. The gala had been intended as a display of wealth and refinement, a carefully orchestrated social event. Instead, it had become a celebration of human talent, perseverance, and authenticity. The janitor's story and his music had reminded everyone present that appearances can be deceiving, that power and status do not always equate to skill or understanding, and that true brilliance often hides in unexpected places. As the evening progressed, the janitor remained in the background, continuing his work while guests lingered near the piano, discussing the performance and the story behind it. The billionaire watched with a newfound respect, silently acknowledging that this man had changed the atmosphere of the gala and perhaps even his own perception of the world. The janitor had not sought attention, yet he had earned it through the simplest and most profound of means, his talent and honesty. By the end of the night, the gala had been transformed into an event that no guest would forget. Conversations turned from trivial social pleasantries to reflections on talent, resilience, and the unexpected ways in which life can surprise us. The janitor, unseen for so long, had become the focal point of the evening, not through ambition or desire for recognition, but through a gift he had nurtured quietly, patiently, and faithfully as the last guests departed. The janitor returned to the piano one final time. He pressed a few gentle notes, letting the sound linger in the empty lobby. There was no audience, no expectation, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed a piece of himself. The billionaire, watching from a distance, felt the full impact of what had happened. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that could not be arranged, bought, or predicted. It was a lesson in humility, recognition, and the true nature of talent. The janitor rose from the piano and gathered his cleaning supplies, moving quietly through the lobby as he had done countless times before. Yet tonight was different. He had not only played, he had reminded everyone, from the billionaire to the guests, of what it means to see, to listen, and to recognize the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary. The silence, the awe, and the acknowledgement of the night would linger long after the lights were dimmed, a testament to the power of music, humility, and human resilience. The morning after the gala, the building seemed quieter, almost reflective, as though the events of the previous night had left a mark that would not fade easily. Employees moved through the halls with subdued energy, some still discussing the janitor's performance, others quietly replaying the music in their minds. The janitor arrived early, as always, carrying his mop and bucket, moving with the same calm precision that had defined his nightly routine. Yet there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People glanced at him differently, not with curiosity or dismissal, but with a quiet respect. They had witnessed something extraordinary and could no longer see him as invisible. The billionaire had arrived even earlier, walking directly to the lobby to check on preparations for the day. The night's gala had left him unsettled, not in a negative way. but in a manner that forced him to reconsider his assumptions. He found the janitor arranging chairs and polishing the floor near the piano. The man looked up, meeting the billionaire's gaze without hesitation. For a moment there was a pause, a silent exchange of understanding between them. The billionaire saw not a janitor, but a person whose talent had surpassed expectation, or whose dedication had demanded acknowledgement. Without a word, the billionaire walked over to the janitor. "I want to talk to you," he said, his tone serious but not harsh. The janitor nodded, setting aside his mop and bucket, and followed him to a quieter corner of the lobby. The building was emptying, giving them a rare moment of privacy. The billionaire gestured toward the piano. "Last night you played like no one I have ever heard. I have seen many professionals, many famous musicians, but what you did, it was different. It was honest, powerful, and moving. I want to help you. Not as charity, but because I recognize true talent when I see it." The janitor remained quiet, considering the offer carefully. He had spent years avoiding attention, keeping his talent hidden, not out of shame but out of necessity. Life had demanded he survive in a world that did not value him for what he could do, only for what work he could perform. And yet, the sincerity in the billionaire's words resonated with him. This was not about money or status. It was about respect, about acknowledgement of skill and passion. He finally nodded, a simple gesture, accepting the offer without excitement or fanfare. Understanding that actions would matter more than words, the billionaire arranged for the janitor to receive proper opportunities to play again. A small, private recital was organized for trusted guests, followed by invitations to more formal performances. The janitor, however, chose to continue his work quietly, blending his old life with the new possibilities. He did not rush into the spotlight, but he did accept guidance and support. Understanding that his talent deserved a stage, and that others could finally see what he had long known to be true, as days turned into weeks. The janitor's life began to change subtly. The building's staff treated him with respect, offering small gestures of acknowledgement and admiration. Guests who had attended the gala reached out to hear more of his music, and word of his performance spread. Yet he remained humble, never boasting, never seeking fame. Each note he played carried the same sincerity and depth as the first, unaffected by recognition or applause. Music was his language, his expression, and he continued to communicate it with integrity. The billionaire watched these developments with a sense of fulfillment he had rarely experienced. He had thought of himself as a man who had seen and controlled everything, yet the janitor had shown him that true talent and greatness could exist quietly, in places where he had never thought to look. The lessons were subtle but profound. Respect must be earned, not assumed. Talent and humanity are not always visible, and the quiet perseverance of a single individual can inspire and transform more than the wealth and power of many. The janitor's performances became a part of the building's life. Small recitals at first, gradually growing to more significant events. Each time he played with the same honesty and passion, never seeking to impress, only to share the music that had lived within him for so long. The billionaire attended many of these performances, sometimes silently in the back, absorbing the sound and the proof that recognition and respect could bridge worlds. Other guests and attendees followed, drawn by the stories of the gala and the man who had defied expectations. Through it all, the janitor maintained his humility. He continued his nightly rounds, caring for the building, observing its rhythms, and finding inspiration in the quiet corners and empty hallways where he had once dreamed alone. Music and work coexisted seamlessly for him, a balance that kept him grounded even as recognition grew. He had achieved what he had once feared impossible, a life where his talent was acknowledged. Yet he remained true to himself, unaltered by applause or expectation. The billionaire, meanwhile, found himself changed in ways he had not anticipated. He had always measured success by wealth, influence, and control. But the janitor had reminded him that greatness could exist quietly, in the unlikeliest of places, and that respect must be earned through dedication and authenticity. He began to see the world differently, seeking out talent, listening more carefully, and recognizing that his assumptions could be flawed. The encounter had humbled him, teaching him the value of observation, patience, and acknowledgement of skill beyond status. Months passed, and the janitor's story continued to unfold. His music reached larger audiences, yet he remained grounded, committed to his craft and the simple, quiet dignity of his everyday life. He was invited to play at schools, small theaters, and community events, bringing joy and inspiration to people who had never known of him before. Each performance carried the same honesty and emotion, connecting hearts and reminding people that talent is not always obvious, and that persistence and humility are as valuable as skill. One afternoon, the janitor returned to the lobby, where the piano had once again become his companion. He ran his fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar resistance and smoothness. Remembering the night that had changed everything, the billionaire appeared, watching quietly from a distance, no words necessary. The music flowed, filling the empty space, a reminder of the journey of the hidden talent revealed, and of the respect earned, not through wealth or power, but through dedication and honesty. The story of the janitor became a legend within the building and beyond. Employees told newcomers about the man who had played a piano and silenced a room of elites. Guests who had attended the gala remembered the performance vividly, speaking of it as an extraordinary moment that challenged their assumptions and reminded them of the power of human potential. The janitor, for his part, continued quietly, letting the music speak for him, content that his story had reached those who would listen and be changed by it. The billionaire, watching from the sidelines, often reflected on the lessons learned. He had gained not only an incredible musician to share with the world, but a deeper understanding of humility, recognition, and the unexpected places where greatness can be found. He had seen the transformative power of talent and persistence, and it left an imprint on his approach to life, business, and the people around him. In the end, the janitor's journey from unseen worker to recognized musician was more than a tale of skill. It was a story of patience, resilience, and the courage to remain true to oneself. He had shown that talent does not need validation to exist, but when it is finally recognized, it can inspire, transform, and remind everyone that greatness often hides quietly in the ordinary. The building, the guests, the billionaire, and everyone who witnessed his music were changed, not only by the notes he played, but by the example of a life lived with dedication, humility, and unwavering passion. The janitor's life was no longer defined solely by his work cleaning floors. It was defined by the music he shared, the people he inspired, and the respect he earned without ever demanding it. His journey was complete, not because of fame or fortune, but because he had reclaimed his voice, his art, and the recognition he had always deserved. And the piano, once a silent witness to his hidden talent, now sang with him openly, a companion and a symbol of resilience, proof that even the quietest of lives can produce the most extraordinary stories.